So I'm recording. So we're going to start photosynthesis. It is an application of transport across the membrane. All right. In fact, we're talking about co-transport and active transport, and there's all kinds of transporting going on in photosynthesis, which is why it's important that you understand what transport is. Sure. Remember, I'm recording this, so you can always get it, anything you're missing once I post it. And I found out today that I can post it on the CMSD mobile Wi-Fi, so that's wonderful. I can post it in school, so you don't have to wait till I get home. All right, so I'll say it one more time, and that is that photosynthesis is an application of membrane transport. A lot of what we talk about in photosynthesis and respiration, how do we make ATP? That's really the question, because ATP is how everything's run. Is that right? Because what's the question everybody has, bless you, every human has, how do I make money, right? And every living cell on Earth has the question, how do I make ATP? Because ATP is their money. Life needs ATP. You need money, right? No money, no food, no house, no car, no phone. No good, right? No ATP, no energy. No energy, no life. No good. Understood? That's why we call ATP the cell's currency, the energy currency of the cell, right? Currency, money. So we're going to be talking about that in earnest today. We're going to get in depth. Now, my question for you before I go on, and I promised you a moment where you might ask a specific question if it's not covered on the videos that I've uploaded, or if it's not covered in the notes, so that I'm going to say, let me answer it now. If it is covered, I'm going to ask you to come after school or during advisory to get tutoring. Because if it's covered and you haven't watched it, it's not my fault, right? So now let's go ahead and cover it again. Let me say, are there any questions about membrane transport that you don't feel was covered well enough? Please. Yes.
Okay, so in the reading in chapter 7, they were talking about factors that affect the rate of diffusion. So what they said, concentration, temperature, and pressure. So we only focused on the concentration. Will it be?
What a perfect question. And so that was an amazing question. That was an educated, prepared question. Did you all see how that question was? Why I love that question? She integrated everything. The reading, the class discussion, wonderful. I wish I could say your name, but we're going to focus on concentration. But you're right, temperature and pressure does impact diffusion. All right? So think about it. Think about what impacts if you are in this corner and you fart. What's going to impact that gas moving across the room? The wind, the pressure. What's wind? Air pressure, right? So if there's wind, if there's a fan, if I'm standing in front of a fan, that's bad luck for you if I fart, right? Because you're going to smell it a lot faster, right? And of course, the other thing that impacts diffusion rate is temperature. And you know that because you know that some people put cologne on, right? And what happens when they're in the gym and they have cologne on, they're working out? What happens to that cologne? It gets strong, doesn't it? And girls that have sports and boys that have sports, you know that when your fellow students, if you don't wear cologne or perfume, when they work out, holy cow, you don't want to be next to them when they're working out, right? Because that stuff comes off of them really quickly. That's because of the higher the temperature, the faster things evaporate, right? And once they evaporate and go into gas, that's when you smell them. Does that make sense? But now, why is it that we are concerned mostly about concentration with the cells? That's because in cells, what we're dealing with in cells is a pretty constant temperature and a constant pressure. So, what? We touched on it, but we didn't focus on it because in a cell in your body, you have a constant temperature and a constant pressure, right? I mean, you have a 97.8, maybe. Some of you might be set at 98, but whatever it is, that's the same. What's the only thing that changes inside your body? The concentration, right? So that's really what we focus on in biology with concentration. Now gases, breathing in gases, cold versus not. fish breathing in gases, then temperature becomes an issue. All right, but there's all kinds of reasons why. Great question. Anything else? Yeah. Go ahead.
I know we talked about this a lot, but I'm still not fully understanding of how you know when the solids move in or out.
You have to be told, right? So I'm only going to touch on it really quickly. You can come and see me during advisory after school, but let me say this. It's a good question. I want to say that first of all. It's really an essential, the reason I think it's a good question is because it's really, really foundational, right? You have to understand that in order to solve the problems. And how do you know if something passes the membrane or not? If it's ionic, it doesn't. If it's ionic or big, it doesn't pass through easily. It's going to need what? Hell, it's going to need help from a protein, exactly. Are you listening? You asked the question, but now you're not listening. So now listen to what I'm saying. If you know it's charged and you're not told anything else, then you can assume it's not going to pass unless there's a protein. If you know it's big and you're not told anything else, then you can assume it's not going to pass unless there's a protein. Or phagocytosis is happening, or endocytosis, right? Where you get the membrane swallowing up the large particle. Does that make sense? So that's number one. And let me answer this way. You will usually be told in an osmosis or diffusion problem that it passes or it doesn't pass. Sometimes they're going to expect that you know. For instance, most gases pass easily through the membranes. They pass through the membranes because they're small and they're nonpolar. Right? So what passes through the membranes easily? Small and nonpolar things. Bless you. The other stuff, it depends. And usually they tell you in the problem. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. Again, if you need more help, I'm here during advisory after school today, so come and ask me. Also, I uploaded 2 videos today. They might help you. You might want to try to look at those. Or any of the ones I posted in the past, or Khan Academy does a great job as well. There's all kinds of videos out there. The Amoeba Sisters do some good stuff with that. I like the Amoeba Sisters. Some people think they're irritating. Can we close the door, please? All right, next question. Yeah.
While I was doing the scientific returning, I kept on seeing that word fluid mosaic.
Fluid mosaic. Yeah, we did talk about it a little bit. Remember I showed you a picture of like stained glass, and I said, look, this is a mosaic. And a mosaic is just a bunch of different things coming together and making a picture. Yeah, collage, just like a big collage. Well, that's the cell membrane. The cell membrane is not just all phospholipids, it's phospholipids and all kinds of proteins and carbohydrates and phospholipids and just all kinds of crazy things all coming together to form one thing called a membrane. And the reason we call it a fluid mosaic is because the membrane is always moving. The proteins are always constantly shifting. It's like a sea of lipids, and these proteins are floating in the sea, and they act like rafts. And there's some of them are pinned down because of the exoskeleton, the extracellular skeleton and the cytoskeleton. They kind of pin some things down, but mostly they move around, and there isn't really much issue about it. That's why we call it a fluid mosaic model. So you have to think of the membrane as kind of this ever-changing kind of landscape, if you will. Any other questions quickly? No? Seeing none, we're moving on. Let's take a look at photosynthesis. I hope you guys had a chance to look at the chapter reading. This is not from your book, but this is from a college textbook, but I like a lot of their diagrams, and I think some of them are very similar to the ones you have in your textbook. So because of that, and because of some of the details they go into that kind of explain some of the background, I thought it was important to go ahead and do this and use this source. So this is a leaf, and obviously this is a photosynthetic organism that's multicellular. It's eukaryotic, right? It's called the plant, right? And plants have leaves. And leaves are tissues. Just like your skin is a tissue, leaves are tissues too. Leaves have different kinds of cells. So what's a tissue? Different kinds of cells working together, right? To do a function. Well, a leaf has tissues, and one of the tissues is the epidermis. What do you think is a necessary function of this epidermis?
Oh, say that again?
This is the epidermis, the outside of the leaf. What do you think is what is a necessary function? Protect it. Protect it from the environment. Excellent. So a tree's sitting there with leaves out. What do you think it needs to do? What kinds of things does it need protection from?
The water.
Water, absolutely. Water's a big one. And because of that, there's this thing called the cuticle. So most leaves have this layer of wax. It's a fat. Wax is a fat, by the way. And what do we know about fats? What do we know about lipids? What do they do? Do they like water or do they hate water? They hate water. So wax is when you have wax on something, what does it do to water? It repels it. Excellent. Yeah, that's right. It repels it. That's why people wax their surfboards and their cars. They wax everything because when the water hits it, what does the water do? It falls off, right? It beats off. Why does it beat off? Because wax repels water. If there's no wax in the water, then you have osmosis is going to happen into the cell or out of the cell. You don't want that to happen. It's going to mess up the leaf because the cells mess up, and you don't want that, right?
So
You don't want the cells losing water or gaining water because of evaporation or because there's too much water. So the cuticle acts like a shield, like a raincoat. All right? So your raincoat acts the same way. Your raincoat repels water. You ever see people with ponchos and raincoats in the rain or umbrellas? They repel water. That's exactly what the cuticle's doing. Question?
So could it take too much water?
Well, remember, where does a plant get the water? From our lab. What did we learn? From the ground. So the plant's getting its water, it's drinking from the ground. So it's not really drinking from its leaves. In fact, the only thing that it needs to do with the leaves is to transpire. And what's transpiration is like they're a plant form of sweating, like perspiration, right? But it's transpiration because it's just the water evaporates and leaves out of the stoma. Now be very, very careful with this word. This word stoma is this opening, and tomorrow I'll show you some pictures of it. It's really creepy. When you look, next time you eat salad, you're going to be like, there has these thousands, they look like lips and mouths. Underneath, there's thousands of these little mouths underneath each leaf. They let gases in and out. Because you have this cuticle on both sides, the leaf is pretty sealed. But you need to have a way to get things in and out, right? You need to let gases out. You need to what gases are coming out of the leaf?
Carbon dioxide.
No.
Oxygen.
Oh, oxygen, that's right. Oxygen's coming out. So that's good, it's good. That's why we do this. What gases are coming in? Carbon dioxide. So we have to have that gas exchange, and that's why they have stoma. Otherwise they wouldn't need stoma. It's stoma. See, that's it. You have to be careful. And the chloroplast is a very similar word. And we'll look at that. So it's stoma, S-T-O-M-A. Once you put an R in there, it changes the word completely. It's crazy. I hate it when words are very close together because we get confused, right? Especially if it's in the same context. So stoma in plants is the opening in the leaf that lets gases exchange. But the problem is that as oxygen's coming out and carbon dioxide is coming in, what else can get in and out?
Waste.
Well, yeah, that's true, but not really. The waste goes down in the roots. But bacteria is possible, yes. But the key is that in the plant, what gets in and out of the stoma is water. Water leaves, it evaporates and goes out. That's a good thing for plants. And we'll talk about why that is, because then what happens is up at the top, as the water leaves the leaves, that creates a negative pressure, and what does that do to the water in the roots? As water's leaving here, it leaves an empty space, so what does that do to the roots? What does that encourage? The water goes up the tree or the plant because water's leaving the top, and what you get is this high water concentration at the roots and low concentration up at the top, and what happens to things move from high to low. So you get water going up the plant through the xylem, through the let's call them through the tubes, the vascular tissue, right? The tubes. The water comes up from the roots and out through the leaves. You have this circulation of water. That's good as long as there's plenty of water. When is it not good? When it's not enough, or maybe there's too much, and so we have to do things differently in the rainforest, and differently in places where the places are very hot. Really, it's not really about the rain, or in the desert, right? Because if you open the stoma out in the desert, what's going to happen to all the water in the plant? It's going to evaporate, and then is there water a lot of water in the ground? Not really, so the plant's going to die because it's going to run out of water. So plants, these plants have to do things a little differently. We'll talk about that by the end of the week. Yeah.
So when it's coming out the top, it's high up there, then low down there. So I mean,
So let me draw it. That's a good point. Let's go ahead and draw it. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's important. It'll be a long-term importance. But think about this. Here are the tree's leaves, right? And I know it's horribly drawn, but whatever. So there's the branches, and kind of, there's.
wait, what is this? What is this?
A tree. Mendoza, you messed it up when you started putting them lines.
Well, the lines are branches. The trees are much more, and I'm not going to draw a giant tree, but the point is, I'm not going to draw 1,000 leaves. Thank you very much. So, all right, let's all be quiet, please. All right, so we have all these leaves, all right? And you're not listening. And so you have, of course, you have a ground. Let's make the ground this like so. And underneath the ground, what happens to the tree? What does it split up into? Roots, right? And down, that's right. And down here you have the water table, and so there's water down here, and we'll look, and but now the water's here. There's a lot of water, so this is high, right? High concentration of water. And up here, water's leaving. As water evaporates out of the stoma, so you got high, what's going to happen here? It's going to go up. And why is it going up? It's hydrogen bonding is one force, and of course and it goes into the leaves, right? And then where does it go from there? It goes out again as a gas. And that's constantly flowing.
It's a gas.
Yeah, it evaporates up here. It turns into gas, steam. We call it steam, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens to you when you're running. You guys go exercise, or you go work out, lift weights. You're sweating. What happens to that water? Why are you not wet the rest of the day? Because that water does what? Evaporates. And if you've worked out a lot, you know that and you have to work out a lot. What do you feel on your forehead when when that water's evaporated? What's left on your skin? Have you ever felt that?
Dirt. It's like
it's not dirt.
Like a waxy feel.
It's like crystal. It feels like sand, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's salt.
Ugh.
It's salt. It's salt because your sweat is salty, right? And so the water evaporates, but salt stays behind. And it dries, and that's the water leaves. It turns into gas.
Could you like over sweat, like all your sweat?
Yeah,
like,
you could dehydrate. It's difficult to do unless you're working out a lot, but yeah.
Or what if you're just not hydrated?
Then you become dehydrated. It could be really dangerous, so be careful. Yeah. Yeah.
So do a cactus got a stoma? Did I say that right?
What? That's a brilliant question. Hold on to that question, because at the end of the week, it's a brilliant question. At the end of the week, there's a way evolution has found a solution to the problem. And we're going to look at it. So just keep thinking about it. But it's a great question. I'm going to move on, though, and focus on what I want to talk about today. But please write it down. Write it down, because that's the kind of question I'm looking for when I grade your notebooks. That shows you thinking. And if those of you that didn't come up with that question, maybe you should write that question down. Yeah, I'm glad. I believe it. It's a great. All right, so take a look at one of these cells. If we take a look at one of these cells, we're all familiar with this cell, right? It's a eukaryotic cell. It has cell walls, so we know it's a plant cell because it has all the characteristics of a plant cell. It has chloroplast here, right? And there's mitochondria as well, but they're not drawn. There's a Golgi body, there's endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth. This is the nucleus. There's the central vacuole, right? So we all know that this is a plant cell, right? Everybody should be able to visualize that, yeah? No, it's eukaryotic. Why? How do we know? Many ways. Number one, all plants are eukaryotic. And what does this have?
A cell wall.
If you don't know that, there's more work. Put that in your list. Write that down. Write it down. If you get confused, write it down. Stop speaking to me about it. Write it down. That's something you got to come to tutoring about. I don't have time to go back and cover that. We're going to go ahead. If it's, oh Lord, you don't listen, you don't think. Moving on. So here's the chloroplast. This is a general format of a chloroplast, and its job is to take light and water and CO2 and make sugar. That's what it does. That's it. It makes sugar for the plant. It's making sugar for itself. But of course, we steal the sugar, right? Animals, one thing at a time, write it down. If you have a question, write it down. I don't want to interrupt the flow right now. I will allow you to ask questions later if we have a chance. So we have these little structures you're going to have to know. Now look at this word. There's the word. It's really annoying. People that have done, at least one person did their homework and they asked, "What, isn't that stroma?" Well, no, stroma is actually, stoma is what?
That's that little opening.
It's the opening in the leaf. The stroma, that's right, it's the lips. The stoma, S-T-O-M-A, is an opening in the leaf. It's a bigger scale. The stroma is inside an organelle, inside a cell in an organelle. And a stroma is this space right here. See the space? It's called the stroma.
So all of that is strong.
That's the space. All this space you see here.
So
It's a fluid-filled cavity. That's right. It's a space.
Fluid what?
It's just a space. A space with fluid inside the chloroplast, right? Which is the organelle.
So is this just inside?
Yes. The stroma. It's just a space. It has a concentration of ions that's going to allow us to make ATP. It's going to allow us. It's just like if you want to think of this similar to the blood of the chloroplast, right? It's the fluid that has the stuff that the chloroplast needs to do its thing. All right. The concentration is the amount of stuff in there, not space, that's stuff that's in that space. So then when we're talking about the stroma, it's this space. The thylakoid is this membrane. Membrane. Fluid, concentration, membranes. What might we be talking about? This is all in chapter 8, by the way. We might be talking about transporting stuff, right? Across that membrane. Concentration inside the stroma. See, these are all ideas that should be floating around your heads. Now, a stack of these thylakoids, a stack of them, see like pancakes, you see them?
Yeah.
The stack of them is called a granum. These are vocabulary words you should become familiarized with. You should know what these are. When you think of a chloroplast, you should be thinking about this. And we covered it a little bit already in your cell project earlier in the year.
So it's okay.
So a granum is a stack of these thylakoids. Just a stack. And there's an inner membrane here, and then there's an outer membrane.
What is the thylakoid?
The thylakoid is the membrane.
You said it's a stack of what?
Thylakoid.
Thylakoids.
Thylakoid.
Look at, please, here's two things I need you to do. I need you to do your reading. That's number one. And number two, pay attention here. I said your thylakoid is your membrane. You see it all connected here? A stack of them, you see the stack of these membranes, is called the granum.
Does the chloroplast make chlorophyll?
Chloroplast does make chlorophyll, yes. But it makes chlorophyll so it can do what? What is the chloroplast trying to do? I said it already. It's trying to make sugar. Look, I don't know what else I can do except say it. When you hear this, when I upload this and you listen to it, please listen to the fact that I already told you and I'm still getting the same questions. So I'm telling you, a chloroplast, clearly its job is to take sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and make sugar. We went through a lab, a virtual lab in class, where you did that, right? Those were the questions you answered. You put them, you turned them in. You got credit for it. What are the three products of photosynthesis? Or what are the products of photosynthesis? Sugar and oxygen. What's necessary to do photosynthesis? Carbon dioxide and water and light. Right? So those are that you know this or you weren't paying attention. Yes.
Okay, I know you said this, but I'm still confused.
Uh-huh.
What are the stacks? Like, what are they?
They're just stacks of membranes. The membranes are here. And if you stack them, do you see it? 1, 2, 3. This is a membrane. Do you see the membrane? Do you see it? Yes or no?
I see it.
Okay, so you see that there's a stack of them?
Yeah.
That's it.
It look like it's a piece of that.
They're just all stacked together. They're folded and stacked. All right, so this isn't going to be important because the whole point of these membranes is to capture sunlight and to act as a barrier, have a high and a low. If you have high and low, you have the ability to make ATP. Yeah.
So without the thiol, whatever that thing is, it's not chloroplast?
That's right. Without these structures, they're not chloroplasts. Now, you can have photosynthesis without these structures, but it's not as efficient. The chloroplast is incredibly efficient in making sugar from sunlight, water, and CO2. All right. So this is important that you know the anatomy of a chloroplast because there's some things that happen out here in the stroma, and there's some things that happen in the granum or in the thylakoid. So you have to be clear on where this stuff is happening, because once we get to the next test, which is right before Thanksgiving break, I'm going to ask questions. What's happening? Where does this happen? Where does that happen? Okay? So you have to know where the stroma is, where the thylakoid is. What's the inner space, the inner membrane space, the outer membrane space? These are important. There's more anatomy to the chloroplast, but that's the important part. All right? Because I promised you I would identify the important parts, right? I just did. Let me highlight them for you in case you weren't listening. So granum, know what the granum is. Know what the stroma is. Know what the thylakoid is. For sure, those three are 100% necessary. Now, you might, in fact, I would even say, let's just kind of let's make them pink instead, kind of a red, important, and let's make yellow, caution, no inner membrane and outer membrane. So if you know those vocabulary words, you're going to have a better idea of where this stuff is happening. So what would I do? I would draw this out, or if you want, print it and white out the actual names and label them on my index card, right? I would do A, B, C, D, and E, and I would cover up the words somehow, either scratch them out or white them out, whatever you want, on my index card. I don't care if you print it and glue it on or you draw it out, whatever you want. And just make sure you know your spaces. Flip them and flip them over and over again. If I see this index card, you guys keep asking me what index cards you're looking for when you grade the notebook. This is one of them, right? I'm just telling you right now. Yeah.
What is the purpose of the inner membrane?
We'll talk about those. We'll talk about the purposes in a minute. But do we all understand what's going on here? We have a leaf. Let's look at the scale. We got the plant that you see with your eyes. Then there's the leaf that you see with your eyes. In the leaf, there's these parts that you don't see, the tissues, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. In one of the cells in the tissue, it looks like this. Is a plant cell. We've talked about it. If you're confusing this with a prokaryote, you need to do some work. You're confused. You have to fix it. That's good that you identified it, but now fix it. In that cell, that eukaryotic cell, there is an organelle that's called a chloroplast. That's it. This is it. It has five major parts. These are they. Know them. All right, and this is an electron micrograph. This is what it actually looks like if you take a look at it. Obviously, the green one's a drawing. This is what we can see in a microscope, in a very powerful microscope. We see the granum, don't we? You see the granum. Do you see them?
Yes.
And you can see the thylakoid membranes. You see this space is what? The stroma. The stroma, right? And you can see that there's a membrane outside. There's a membrane just one outside and one inside.
Where's the pancakes?
These are the pancakes here.
Okay, I see.
Okay? So that's good. Remember, the pancakes are known as granum. This is what the chloroplasts look like or the cells look like under a microscope, and this is an electron microscope looking at the organelle. So under a light microscope, you can see the plant cells, that's what they look like. They're green for a reason. Let's go take a look. Let's take a little closer look at this story. So again, another look at the chloroplast. There's that granum. And if we take a look at the granum, this is the basic outline. This is an outline of photosynthesis. So look at it. This is a really cool outline. I don't think you have one of these, a nice drawing like this about this in your book, so I would draw this if I were you. How would I draw this? Well, let's go ahead and sketch it out. So what are we looking at here? What is this? Yes, this is photosynthesis, good, but what is this structure here? It's one of the thylakoids. You take a thylakoid and you look at it, and you know that stack of thylakoids called the granum. There's the granum, right? We take one of these thylakoids and we cut it out in half, and we can look inside. So we're looking at it like we're looking inside an orange, right? And well, how would I draw it if I were you? I'm going to draw it, so there should be no reason why anyone in this room is not drawing it. So we would have like one membrane, right? The membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, right? Look at it, it's phospholipid bilayer. I'm not going to draw the phospholipid bilayer though. I'm just going to draw kind of an oval, right? Now, what if you want to? Well, if you want to, go ahead and draw the whole thing. Let's go ahead and draw the whole thing. I mean, if you really, I can see some people are like, all right, let's not. So you're just doing a sketch. You know that that's a membrane. It's a cross section of the membrane. What's the membrane called inside the chloroplast? We call it a thylakoid. So there's your thylakoid membrane. Across the, what do you get coming in is sunlight. So light is coming in. And by the way, it's all drawn here, right? Look at it, it's right there. And inside the membrane, inside that, you have this thing called a photosystem. We're going to talk about what the photosystem is. But there's this thing called the photosystem. There's two of them, but we'll talk about it. So there's a photosystem there in the membrane. So where are the light reaction? We're going to break it up into two different reactions, chemical reactions. When we talk about the photosynthesis reaction, where we take CO2 and water and light and make sugar and oxygen, it's actually many, many different steps. And you have to know these steps. You do. You have to know them. So the photosystem's there in the membrane, and inside this whole section, inside the thylakoid, is what happens, what we call the light reactions. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to break it up. And this whole week is all about breaking this up into light reactions, dark reactions. Then we'll look at respiration as well.
What does that mean by light reaction?
We'll have to talk about it, right? It's not something I can explain to you, but just to let you know that we're breaking this up into two parts. One set of reactions requires light. So what do we call those reactions? The light reactions. So that is a short answer. The longer answer is more complicated, and that's what we're going to spend today and tomorrow talking about. So be ready, read your book, because we're going to go quick. So the light reactions, thylakoid, what goes into the light reactions and what goes out of the light reactions is the question. Good. That's, well, kind of. Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, but let's say this. One thing we know, light goes in for sure. And we know also, you're right, that we get water going in. That's for sure. Light and water. Light, water. See the plus? It's a chemical reaction. And out comes what? Out of the light reaction, what comes out? Oxygen. Oxygen comes out, right? Do you see any CO2 happening in the light reactions? No. No, we don't. We don't see any CO2. So that's interesting. The light reactions is just dealing with water. So we're breaking up that big equation that we talked about earlier. right? Photosynthesis, and we're breaking up the pieces. The light reactions are just dealing with water and light and a photosystem, and we're breaking up into oxygen, gas. That's where plants make the oxygen. Now that oxygen leaves the chloroplast. Some of it's used by the plant cell, but it produces excess oxygen, so the rest of the oxygen leaves the cell. Leaves the plant. Huh? Why is CO2 not written in there? Because it's not used here. It's not used in the light reactions. It is used in photosynthesis, you're right, but it's not used in this part of photosynthesis. So we're taking photosynthesis and we're breaking it up into the light reactions, which we're talking about right now, and another set of reactions we call the dark reactions. The dark reactions is a misnomer, so we really shouldn't call them that, but it's a bad name for them. Another name for them is the light-independent reactions. But a lot of us like dark reactions because it's easier, right? This is light-dependent. That's why we call them the light reactions. Good. Question?
Okay, so if there's two reactants, do they still have the same outcome?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll say this, that this is photosynthesis. So when we're talking about the light reactions, this is what you need to know. This is photosynthesis. There's no other way of doing it, photosynthesis.
No, I'm saying like if you say it's a light and it's a dark, right?
Yeah.
Do they still have the same outcome?
Do they use the same reactants and the same products? No. So they use different products, right? And they produce different things and they bring in different things. You see here, we have waters being used, right? And broken up. By the way, that's what light is used for, to break up water. That's why you need light. It breaks the water, breaks the electrons off of water. It turns into hydrogen ions and oxygen gas. Oxygen gas leaves, the hydrogen ions stay. So that's key, right? That's really, really important. But what do you think the night reactions or dark reactions are going to be involving? If this is the oxygen and the water and the light, what's the dark reactions going to have? CO2. And then what's it going to produce? Sugar, right? So you already know what the dark reactions are going to do. The question is how, right? Does that make sense? All right, good. I'm glad. I love the way you guys are thinking this morning. All right. And see, reading sometimes helps. You see some of these people asking great questions because they've done their reading. Homework's important. Just let me get to the last piece here. So one of the things, there's some other stuff that you haven't heard of yet. We've heard of ADP. What's ADP? That's right. Remember active transport. Remember the sodium potassium pump. ADP is produced when the ATP, the phosphate's removed and the energy is released, right? So ADP is required, and ADP comes from what's called the Calvin cycle. We're going to look at the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is the dark reactions. This is the light-independent reactions. Light-independent reactions, and also known as the dark reactions. I don't like the dark reactions as a title, but it's easier than saying light-independent reactions, I suppose. The best thing to call is just the Calvin cycle. Close. No. There is a similar process in cellular respiration called the Krebs cycle. So there's a cycle, right, that we'll talk about. But right now, no. Good questions. People that have read and kind of have a lot of good questions in their minds. So out of the Calvin cycle comes ADP. What do you think so if you have ADP, you probably used an ATP, right? What do you think you used ATP to make in the Calvin cycle? You used energy, right? That's what ATP is doing. You used it to make what? Where did you put that energy? Into what molecule? You guys know. Oxygen's gone. Is there oxygen being used here at all, you think? No. Oxygen's used up here in the light reactions. Carbon dioxide's used to make something. Sugar. That's where that ATP went. It went in to make sugar. So that's why you get energy from sugar, because you put the energy in from ATP. Question? Yes. Once you take ATP, which is adenosine with 3 phosphates, Once you break that phosphate off, boom, the energy's released. What's left is ADP, adenosine diphosphate, 2 phosphates on it. That ADP can be recharged like a battery. Huh? So the ADP is required in the light reactions. It has to go, you need ADP to make what? What do you think you're going to make?
Light.
Well, no, light's not made, light's used. What are you going to make? ADP is going to be, no sugar is made in the light reactions. What comes out of the light reactions if you need ADP? No, oxygen's out, that's already out, check. Water's come in and used up, check. ADP's going in, what's going to come out? If ADP's energy, yes, from what? Somebody said it. ATP. ADP goes in, what comes out? ATP. It's ADP, by the way, plus 1 phosphate, inorganic phosphate.
So what is making?
It's making what?
ATP, right, because you said it was trying.
Yeah, that's what's trying. And where's that ATP going to go?
Back into the column.
Back in the Kalman cycle. It's charging up. So it's like that it's charging it up. That's what it's going. ADP is going into the light reactions to get charged up. And then it takes that energy. Where to get that energy? What's the energy here that we're talking about?
ADP.
Where's the source of all this energy?
Light.
Light. The sun.
The sun.
The sun. Sunlight is the energy for all life, most of the life on Earth. Most of the life on Earth, it's sun. It's the sun that gives us life.
Our reliable source.
It's what's giving us our sugar. Without the light, none of this works. Yeah, question?
So, you know how you were telling us how over there in California, and they had the volcanoes or whatever, and smoke had came up and it was over them for a couple days.
Yeah.
So that means all the plants died too. So that means
Well, plants can go a couple days without sunlight. They can survive. They have stored energy, right? Where do they store that energy? In their roots, right? So they have sugar. They can last a few days without it. If that volcano would have been big enough to block out the sun for a couple months, then you'd see most of the plant life on this planet die, right? And that's no good. Some plants can, like trees, they can hibernate for a year, for like the winter, right? But when we're talking about no sun for months or a year, a couple years, now you're talking about most plants dying.
Right.
And you're hoping that the seeds survive, right? Until the sun is seen again. But without light, this photosynthesis can't happen. You can't make any new sugar. You can use up your stored sugar, right? And you know how they're stored. They're stored in starch, right? Because we saw the starch granules in the cells, right?
Right.
So that's how they're stored. They're stored in sugar, and so the plants can use that sugar to survive long winters. But after that, that's it. And without the plants, what happens to us? That's it. So let's make sure we all understand this, because a lot of people in this world don't get it. We need plants. They don't really need us. We need them. Without them, so when people talk about building and progress and all this, without nature, we're done for. Because we cannot survive without them. Not only do they produce the oxygen that we breathe, they produce the food that we eat. And you say, I eat cows, I don't eat plants. The cows eat grass. They eat plants. All the energy comes from the sun. It starts with plants and comes down what we call trophic levels. All right? All right, so let's go on and look at this. So that's ATP. So one other thing that you need to know, and we're going to be talking a lot about in the next few days, is this thing called NADP and NADPH. And there's something very similar in one of the things that the reason you need light, and we're going to talk about a little bit, is that it excites electrons. Except you're not a piece of wire. You can't just sit there and just let electrons flow through you and think it's going to work. You need something to carry the electron. Something has to carry the electron from one place to the other. And one of these carriers, you're going to have to know 3 of them. All right? By the time you're done, you'll have to know 3 electron carriers. One of them that you have to know, that's the one that's used in photosynthesis, is called NADP. So NAD plus is an electron carrier. You know what an electron is. And it's electron carrier. You see why we went through all the trouble of going through that earlier in the year? Because I knew it was coming. we're going to use electron carriers, and that's NADP, NADP plus. Do not ask me what it stands for. You will not like the answer. So just know what it is. NADP plus. When it's carrying an electron, that's when it's not carrying electron. No electron. I'm going to put no electron if that's okay. When it doesn't have an electron, I'm going to just put a little E with a minus sign. Is that okay? A circle. No electron, it's NADP. When it has the electron, it's NADPH. Why the H? Because when it has an electron, the H sticks to it like a magnet, right? So you have NADPH. So there you have it. That's your electron carriers. When it's no electron and with electron. All right? So obviously, it's what goes in to get the high energy electron. What goes in to get the high energy electron? Which one's going in? Let me use a different color. NADP. NADP plus, probably. Can we use the number plus? Let me use a different color. Let's use this turquoise. So in comes NADP plus, and out comes what?
NADPH.
NADPH. And that's carrying the electron. Where's the electron going to be needed? That high energy electron going to be needed? This is all in the plants, but where's it going to be needed? Which of these two? Into the Calvin cycle. It needs to go in here. So we need all the energy we can get going into the Calvin cycle because we want to take that molecule of sugar. Sugar's high energy. And we need to put all that energy into sugar. So what it does, you take all that sunlight and you break it up. You jam it into ATP. You jam the sunlight into NADPH. And now you've got these high energy molecules. They're like little vibrating little spheres of goodness. And they go right into this thing here called the Calvin cycle, where you're going to take 6 CO2s, all this energy, and you're going to produce a sugar molecule. Boom! There it is, ready for you to eat. And as soon as you eat it, that's how we get energy. When you go to eat an apple, this is what you're eating. You're eating sunlight. You're eating sunlight. It's been changed into chemical energy, right? But it's the same energy that came from the sun. It's there. You're eating it. It's vibrating and it's juicy and it's in your blood. And your body can take it. Now you can use it to move and breathe and think and love and hate, right? All that stuff comes from the sun originally. What's what?
He said pasta.
What did he say?
Pasta.
Oh, pasta has sugar in it. That's the point. All right. Always one comedian in the group. By the way, when you says organic molecules, the reason it says organic molecules and not sugar is because it actually produces not a 6-carbon sugar, but a 3-carbon sugar that can then be used to make all kinds of things. Like, it doesn't have to be used for food. It could be used to make cellulose, which is the structural parts of the plant. But that's why we call them organic molecules, okay? But remember, cellulose is made of sugar, so still. Yeah?
Is there too much energy?
Is there what now?
Ever too much energy?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by too much for what, the purpose, right? So too much energy could produce fire, right? So if you have too much sunlight, too much energy, it's called the excess that starts to break up the organic molecules and it turns into fire. We don't want that unless you're cold and you want to burn some wood for fire, right? So too much for photosynthesis. Is there too much sunlight for photosynthesis? It depends. Like I said, the intensity of the light. If it gets too hot, it could be too much for it. But in general, in nature, no. Right? Are we good? All right, so let's go on. Now we're going to see, this is just an outline. As crazy as this all was, I hope you drew it up. Of course, I'll post it. But this is just an outline. Now we're going to look in depth into each of these. Now, how did we discover these things and what did we discover? Well, when do you think, let me ask you, this is really interesting. When do you think the first time we discovered, like, okay, so we're a bunch of cave people walking around, we're eating vegetables and fruits that we like, right? And we have a society going, there's a leader, let's call Abbas, the leader. He's our leader.
That's the worst leader we have.
It's all right. Don't fight with the leader because then you'll get thrown out of the clan, right? So the clan's walking around. We're walking around, and Abbas is our leader, and he's like, he's telling you to go hunt. He's telling you to wash the dishes, and you don't like it, but you got to do it, right? So we're going. So do you think those guys understood photosynthesis?
No.
Do you think what do you think they thought of? When was
They
the
thought
first?
the world was flat.
Well, maybe not. I don't think they even. Honestly, if you think about it, would you really care if the world was flat or round if you were a caveman? I wouldn't care. The only thing I care about is where's our next meal coming from, right? How do we get our food? Because we're hungry.
So did they eat the plants?
So they ate plants, and of course you had to have your wise people, right? Your teachers, because what are some plants? What are they to us? Poisonous, right? So we have to have somebody in our group here. Maybe it's Abbas. Maybe it's somebody Abbas is designated to be the taster, the local taster. Has to go out and make sure that the food doesn't kill us. So if they eat it, they're like, and they die, then we know we don't eat that. So if
Is that what they be doing to animals, like when they test stuff on animals?
Yeah, we used to test it on ourselves, right? But then we said, wait a minute, this is not too smart. Let's test it on animals. So, well, let's keep going, guys. Yes, you can, but it's complicated.
They're not like.
Yes, they are live, and we could test them on plants, but they wouldn't do us any good. The things that kill plants don't necessarily kill us, right? So we're worried about things that kill us, right? So Abbas is the leader. He's going to pick who's going to be the taster. Of course, I don't want to be the taster, so I'm going to be Abbas's friend. His enemies will be the tasters, and we'll see what happens. So anyways, moving on. That's what cavemen were thinking about. Now let me ask you, when do you think was the first time we really started thinking about what photosynthesis is? What time? Think. Just make a guess. I mean, there's no way for you to know, right?
At the early 1800s.
Let's make a guess. Go ahead. Nick, I can't say names because we're recording, but go ahead. Tell me. Make a guess.
Like since the earth began.
Since the Earth began, you think we've been thinking about photosynthesis? Okay.
I mean, yeah, because you have plants.
You think 1890s? Okay. There's no wrong answer here. There's no wrong answer. Let me tell you, this person, again, I don't want to say this because we're recording. This person is actually kind of correct. We've been thinking about nature and the cycles of nature for a very long time. The ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, the ancient peoples from all over the world have thought of the sun. Think about the Aztecs, they're sun worshippers. They knew the sun was important, right? We've known the sun is important for a very long time. Before we go, I see you packing up. We had a good day today. Wait, before we go, look, this is the year we started to learn it. The question, yeah, that's right. The question began, 1771, this guy named Priestley. Oh, guys, if you could just be quiet, things would go smoother. In the back, I see you. Listen and be quiet. Let me say this and we can get out of here. This guy Priestley in 1771 first asked this question. He took this jar and he sealed it and he had a burning candle inside. What do you think happened to that candle? Stop.
It melted.
It started melting, but it's sealed. What do you think happened to the candle in the jar? It burned out. And he asked himself, there's something in there that's not in there that doesn't let the flame burn. So you know what he did? This guy was a genius. Priestley was a genius. He did a lot of great experiments. He's one of the founders of modern science. Listen, this guy in 1771, before the American Revolution, he took a piece of plant and put it in the jar with the candle. And guess what happened? He could burn it. So he said, what he called it is he said, the plant, please be quiet. He said, the plant renews the air. It's adding something to the air. He said the leaves, not the roots, but the leaves and sunlight, he said. He thought, he didn't know, right? He didn't have all the fancy chemical tests that we have. He said, I think oxygen is being produced by the plant and CO2 is being taken out of the air. I think that's what's going on. That is amazing that a human being could figure that out in the 1700s. He figured that out. And of course he thought it was, and later we figured out it was a carbohydrate that was being produced by this process. So, really amazing stuff. Tomorrow we're going to get in depth. Good luck studying. Remember, you have 2 videos on the YouTube channel. This should help you, okay? So try to pay attention to that. And I will upload this. Don't worry about this video till after the test.